Good afternoon, and welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our premier digital educational platform featuring a variety of interactive programs to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where you need it most. My name is Brooke Gilbert, the Director of Events and Education here at NCIA. I'm very excited to welcome you all to this month's edition of our Fireside Chats with NCIA's Government Relations team. In today's session, our panelists will be taking a deep dive into the topic of Delta-8. You've been seeing and hearing about it everywhere lately, but what actually is Delta-8 and what does it mean for state and federal policymakers? I'm sure our panelists are excited to share their thoughts and expertise with everyone in attendance, so let's go ahead and get this conversation started. As always with our Fireside Chats, I'd like to welcome our moderator for today's session, NCIA's Michael Correa, to the virtual stage. Mike, you can take it away from here.
Thank you, Brooke. And one of these days, I want some walk-up music. So let's work on that so I get the walk-up music. So thank you, everyone. Really looking forward to a lively and educational discussion today on Delta-8. And I'm just going to be honest with you. If you would have asked me 6 months ago what Delta-8 was, my response would be, I don't know, a new Chuck Norris movie, a new sorority, I don't know, let's find out more. And it got Michelle and I to go on an information sort of gathering, fact-finding mission. And what I learned about Delta-8 was truly fascinating. I think it has broad policy implications at the federal and state level. And I thought it would be a great, timely webinar discussion topic. And I don't know if we've ever had this many participants. So just by the numbers, it shows you guys are interested in too. And, you know, this morning I did just a basic Google search on Delta-8, and it was interesting. You know, I went to a couple websites. I won't name the companies in case, you know, anyone's out there knows someone. But a couple of things I saw, the claims, this is a non-intoxicating compound. Okay. But it doesn't get you high. All right. It's legal in most states. And another one, it's a less intense high. Okay, now they're admitting to getting high. So, all right, we got that. Delta-8 is federally legal. And then someone asked, is Delta-8 safe? And the answer is probably, provided you follow all dosing instructions and purchase from a reliable source. And it got me thinking, what's a reliable source? What's a good dosage? How do we determine that? And another one, you guys will love this, Delta-8 is superior to Delta-9 because it carries every benefit of Delta-9, but it's legal. And so these are some of the claims that were made on some of the websites. And it's at least troubling slightly to me when these claims are out there, because I worry about the broad policy implications at the federal level. But I also want to remind people, NCIA is not taking a position on Delta-8. We are learning, and we're learning about this issue. I feel eventually we will do a policy paper on this. We'll have an official position. I feel like the webinar we're doing today is just a conversation starter, getting it out there. And so excited, looking forward to the discussion. Now, I also want to remind people that I was a political science major in college, so I didn't have to take science classes. It was the easy way out. And if you look at our attendees and our speakers today, we have a lot of fancy titles next to their names. And it's going to be, we have a lot of science people, a lot of PhDs, and I think it's going to be a great discussion. And so
Hey,
Michelle?
Mike, I was just going to say before we introduce our stellar panelists here, just as we're doing some housekeeping at the top here, I wanted to mention for all of our attendees today, like you said, that this is purely an informational webinar, that, you know, nothing that's said here is the position necessarily of NCIA as an association. But that being said, I know that we're going to be emailing our members soon and soliciting their feedback on this issue. So if you hear something today that you really agree with or maybe really disagree with, don't worry, we're also going to be soliciting your feedback, and you'll have an opportunity to talk with us as well. So just want to mention that at the top too. Sorry, Mike.
No problem. Thanks, Michelle. And our policy team is listening in on this. And the goal is to get educated on this, learn about the issues, and then actually take a policy position for our federal officials and the implications. You know, Brooke mentioned what implications this has at the state level and what implications this will have at the federal level. So quick introductions on all of our speakers. We have Chris Udala, PhD, President, Chief Scientific Officer, Proverity Labs. We have Greg Girdman, another PhD, co-founder, CEO, ECS Partners. We have Paloma Lafelt, my favorite doctor around here. So she is the Director of Medical Education at Vireo Health. And we have Tiffany Coleman, Director of Quality Processing, Franklin Fields, a botanical company. Welcome, everyone. This is going to be a lively debate. Greg, I just wanted to start out with a basic, although most people know about this, they're not as uneducated on this issue as I was a couple months ago. But if you just want to give just a quick little cannabis 101, tutorial 101 on Delta-8, I'll just throw the question to you, Greg. What is Delta-8?
Sure, thanks. And I'll be very simple about it because I do think people are familiar. Everyone is certainly familiar with Delta-9 THC, right, which is the champion molecule of cannabis. For decades, Delta-9 THC was essentially considered the only active component. Why is that? Well, because in the 60s, when it was isolated, purified Delta-9 THC basically replicated most of the important effects of hash oil, and so it was considered, the active component. And most of the research over the subsequent decades is focused on Delta-9 THC. There are other tetrahydrocannabinols, some of which occur in small amounts in the plant, either because they've degraded into that or they're synthesized in some way that isn't quite clear yet. But the delta really refers to a molecular structure, the position of a double bond in the structure. And Delta-9 refers to a particular position, and if that double bond occurs one step over, it's Delta-8. And the other deltas arise accordingly. They're considered isomers because they have the same number of carbons, but the exact nature of those bonds are different. And what does it do differently? We've known for some decades that Delta-8 THC have some of the similar behavioral effects of Delta-9, but with lower potency. And at the CB1 cannabinoid receptor that is considered the primary driver of psychoactivity, Delta-8 can bind to it, but with less binding affinity and potency. And there's a lot we still don't know, though. I mean, how much does higher concentrations lead to, and so on and so forth. How's that?
That was great. No, I think that's really, really wonderful. So, Chris, I'm gonna pick on you next, but Tiffany, Paloma, you guys feel free to jump in here too. Like you, if you've been here on one of these webinars with me and Mike, you know that we like to have just a free flowing conversation. But Chris, I'm gonna pick on you next and ask you a really, really broad question. So what's all the fuss about Delta-8? Maybe let's take a step back before we get too much into the science, although I know that's certainly all of your specialties here. But tell us why we're even sitting here having this conversation today. What's all the fuss about Delta-8?
Well, I think that the big discussion that I see happening on the national scale is focused around the legality of Delta-8, whether Delta-8 is legal or whether it's not. And I think that's the wrong discussion, and I'm really hoping that we can kind of change that. Delta-8 to me is like a unicorn. It's a hypothetical. It doesn't really exist the way people think it does. And so what we're seeing on the market is converted from CBD for the most part, and it's a mixture of synthetic byproducts and isomers that are not being purified. And so you're not getting Delta-8, you're getting contaminated Delta-8. And my concern is that consumers are being misled and given compounds that we have no idea of their toxicity or their efficacy for that matter. And so they're being used as guinea pigs to try out these unknown compounds purely for the sake of margins or profits. And I think a lot of the discussion is whether the Delta-8 is legal, but I think the discussion should include the fact that these products that are being made in garages and basements and even in proper synthetic conditions are significantly contaminated with these impurities, and nobody's purifying them. And so should we be giving these to consumers before we understand them?
Yeah, I'm reading a lot of comments on the side about safety concerns. I mean, Delta-8 in the plant is present in such a minuscule amount. So the way that works, synthesizing this and really amplifying it is completely unnatural. It's not the actual Delta-8 that's the problem. It's the side chain reactions that occur when you switch over from CBD. And what happens, this is my little double bonds right here, is that when it moves over from Delta-9 to Delta-8, Delta-8 binds with the cannabinoid receptor really easily. But Delta-8, on the other hand, the isomer of it, we don't know how it bonds. Because of the Schedule 1 status of Delta-9 in itself, we don't even have enough research for that. So how are we really able to discuss the safety profile of a completely relatively unknown cannabinoid? And it's just the tip of the iceberg. We're talking about Delta-10. We're talking about all these other excipients that are coming in from these reactions, and it's really detrimental to people that are using it. I mean, Tiffany and I were talking about kids that are getting sick in Indiana, across the country, just because of the fact that, again, if we don't have research available on Delta-9, how are we going to have it on Delta-8 to really give it to people? And these are kids that are taking gummies and have no idea what the dosing should be.
Tiffany, love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there was a comment that just came in on the chat too, that, talks about, people getting some pretty significant highs. And sometimes maybe it's a pretty significant high from Delta-8, and if it was fully isolated and we can do some research and we find that out. But also the process that is used to create this creates Delta-9 too, right? It can go both ways. So it really could just be that, you had 10% Delta-9, which if you're not used to having Delta-9 is a lot for you, especially if you're vaporizing it and you've never vaped before, right? A lot of these markets are in places where there are no legal avenues to get to Delta-9. I think in a majority of places, if you could get Delta-9, you would buy that, right? The price points are very similar. And, maybe it's a better, more safe product from the standpoint of appropriate levels of testing, right? And, decades of people doing Delta-9, where Delta-8 just wasn't available. I think another side of it for me, and I think Chris really pointed to this nicely, is, in these processes, we're not just making Delta-8, right? I mean, this is something that I do, and I want to do this process, and I can tell you, I have yet to make a batch that I felt safe selling to a consumer, right?
Which is the exception, Tiffany, for sure. And Paloma mentioned we're talking about Delta-10. We're talking about Delta-10, but I can go to a shop that has a row of Delta-10 carts on the shelf already. And I had one of the first PhDs on cannabinoids on the planet, and I've studied this nonstop since. I don't know what Delta-10 does. Delta-8, we can say there was one clinical study with a small number of pediatric patients that had synthetic Delta-8 in the 80s, coming out of Professor Mashulam's group, and it was well tolerated for fighting nausea and chemotherapy, and that's pretty much it. But kids tolerate Delta-9 pretty well too when they're undergoing chemotherapy. Sorry to interrupt on that thread there.
No, and I was just going to say, Tiffany, though, I want to hear the end of that thought, because I think that was really important, where you were saying that you've never tested a batch of Delta-8 that you felt comfortable giving to a consumer. Can you finish up that thought, and then also tell us, then what happens then?
Yeah, so I mean, it goes in the trash. That's what happens now. And I know, I'm a scientist, and this is, I work in the legal cannabis market here in Michigan, right? So, Delta-9 is my bread and butter. Delta-8 is stuff that I'm doing because my peers across the nation are doing it, right? I want to be involved. I want to see what they're doing. I have the equipment to do it. So why not? If I'm also, doing these activities like not at work, right? Because there's no reason to bring those kinds of contaminants and things like that into, a licensed facility, in my opinion. So, everything for me is small batch, but it's not to where I feel safe about it. I know I have some peers that feel like they're really getting to a point where the filtration that they're able to do is good enough, that, the reaction is controlled enough that they feel certain, and they have partners that are third party that are doing testing like Chris's lab will do, where they're actually able to show that, there are no isomers, there are no unknown peaks. And, these people are spending a lot of time in, chromatography to separate things out. And then, following up that chromatography with additional membrane filtration so that they know that they're really getting it as clean as possible, while also having very validated controlled processes for the creation of these substances, and I feel good about that. I don't feel good about it for myself. And this is what I do, right? This is what I've been doing for 20 years, right? I'm a natural product, organic chemist. I take things in nature and I make them synthetically from cheaper materials. I think a lot of people in the chat are talking about, why are we even doing this right now? Well, because a lot of people have a lot of CBD isolate that is worthless because the federal government said you can't do anything with that CBD right now because reasons. Well, they actually didn't say CBD. I don't know if anybody noticed, but what they said is cannabis derived products, except for like fibers and other such things, are not safe for human consumption according to the FDA right now. So, you know, here we keep having this conversation about, oh, is it legal? Well, not if you call the FDA, they're going to tell you no.
Yeah.
That you can't put it in food or dietary supplements.
It's an adulterant.
Yeah.
Because it's an adulterant, and all these impurities also adulterants, right? There's nothing generally recognized as safe here. So, you know, what are we really talking about then? Yes, I want to see that it's safe, and I want to get to the point where I feel comfortable personally, and then I'm going to have hopefully the ability to do research because of it not having Delta-8 THC in it, and then I'll actually get approval to do the research from the government, and then I'll do the research, right? But that's years from now.
Yeah,
instead of 6 months ago, we just all started seeing this in markets and gas stations.
You bring up a lot of good points around the safety. And when I was mentioning some of the claims that are being said online, you know, I think two big policy issues we need to be thinking about. One, is Delta-8 safe? That's going to take some time to figure that out. And second, are you getting Delta-8 in a product that you think, you know, it says it's Delta-8? And those are two separate issues that we need to definitely resolve. Although this is the hot issue, it's been, you know, the buzz over the past few months. Greg, is this like newly found? Is this been around? Tell me, like, is there a history with this? Is there any type of history or studying outside of the one you mentioned a couple of years ago?
With Delta-8?
Yeah.
Not clinically. That's the only study that I've ever been aware of. There were mouse studies looking at classical behavioral effects and saw that it was a weaker form of Delta-9, but it also was not looked into much because, you know, if it occurs naturally in you know, cannabis flower, it's very low. I mean, I think the interest may have been drug development. You know, it was touched on by Tiffany. I mean, the Delta-8 boom has occurred through a conversion of two significant events. The commodity price of CBD isolate dropping like a stone because of overproduction and because of this regulatory vacuum on what can be done with it, and the 2018 Farm Bill that uses this language of hemp-derived derivatives essentially being hemp, and that has been taken advantage of to say that I mean, it also says that synthetic cannabinoids are not allowed, and that's a crux of an argument here of what defines synthetic, because CBD can convert into Delta-8 or isomerize or degrade or cyclize. There's all these soft euphemisms for the kinds of chemical reaction that occurs. But in my mind, as somebody who's taught biology and chemistry, if you start with one substance and turn it into something different, it's synthetic. And I'm not trying to make the DEA's argument here, and I'm not trying to make any moral claim about breaking federal law. Everybody's breaking federal law. That's one of the huge ironies and absurdities of federal policy on cannabis. And while I'm on a soapbox, look, we've all got a natural right to pursue cannabis, and it's the most natural thing as can be, and prohibiting it is not natural. But Delta-8 emerged because of the legal opening in a law that I believe was really written to help advance industrial hemp farming, and the availability of CBD isolate. And, you know, I worked at a company that was creating CBD isolate, and, you know, in full disclosure, you know, some of my own income last year, you know, my bills were paid in part by CBD isolate cells that I'm sure were feeding the supply chain. I'm not creating a moral position on this, but it's pretty new for these reasons.
And with that, NCIA is not taking a moral position on this because we're still finding our position. And I don't want anyone to think that we are. What I want to get in front of is the narrative. And the narrative is, you know, I've been lobbying for cannabis for 8 years now, and it's getting middle America comfortable with the cannabis issue, wanting this product behind a tax and regulated market. And what I worry about is our opponents seeing something, jumping on this and saying, you see, it's big bad cannabis, selling any products just to make money, when in reality it's not. What this is sort of an unintended consequence of, or a loophole, or a side effect of a gray market, and how we need legalization. We need rules and regulations to address some of this. But I want to throw out, we have, Tiffany, Michigan, Chris, I think you're in Massachusetts, Greg, you're in Tennessee. I'll throw it to each of you. Tiffany first, what are you seeing in Michigan as far as either on the shelves, or what's the state's doing? What is Michigan doing in response to this, or what's Michigan doing on this issue?
Yeah, so we're seeing it all over. There are licensed marijuana dispensaries, retail locations, provisioning centers that have Delta-8 in them right now. You can get it at the gas stations, the 7-Elevens. I don't know it's actually a 7-Eleven because I haven't been to one in a long time, but that's what I'm being told. But certainly at your, the local corner stores are having this on their shelves, as well as your normal head shops and smoke shops that have been around forever, that are usually skirting that gray zone. On the regulating side, the legislature here is looking at this already. We're working really hard to put some guidance around how this should actually be done so that consumers can be safer, establishing what those impurity percentages can look like, how you can do it safely. Because this process, right, it's dangerous too. Just like every kind of cannabis extraction and synthesis processes out there, they should be done in controlled environments. So you don't accidentally blow yourself up, because you can, right? This is an exothermic reaction with solvents that are then explosive gases if they're not in the right kind of conditions. So we're looking at, in the state of Michigan, putting in rules around all of that. So the testing that needs to happen, how it can be sold, where it can be sold, to make sure that it's safe, right? And also acknowledging that, hey, right now, this stuff isn't supposed to be coming from out of state, and it's coming from out of state, right? Because we don't have permission from the federal government via the hemp bill to be moving these products in interstate commerce, because the FDA said they're not allowed, right? So, putting all of that track and trace information in behind it as well. And it's all part of, making sure that we're ahead of the game. We're behind by 6 months, but at least maybe we'll be a little further ahead than we were, say, with the last huge crisis that made everybody kind of give us the stink face, when we had diluents in our vape cartridges that were making people sick, and I'm pretty sure killed some people, right? We don't want that to happen. And it is happening, right? People are getting sick. Sometimes it's the dosage, sometimes it's the impurities. And that doesn't mean Delta-8 is bad.
Yeah.
But maybe your
Tiffany,
product needs a little bit more finesse.
You bring up good stories, because I think of K2, I think of Spice, I think of the vape stuff going on. But Chris, what are you seeing up in Massachusetts as far as either on shelves or what the response is?
Yeah, so we see them everywhere. The Delta-8 products are so prolific. We see them in all the gas stations and shops. And I think partly because of consumer demand, there's so much hype around the Delta-8 that even several of the licensed producers in Massachusetts are going down this pathway and creating Delta-8 products. When I first started seeing them, I approached our regulators and said, hey, what are your thoughts on this? And this was 6 months ago. And we're still waiting for a response from our state regulators for the cannabis industry. We have tested thousands of products, whether they're consumer products, raw ingredients, or intermediaries from different processes. And after thousands of products, I have not seen one yet that I would consider Delta-8. I would consider them all heavily contaminated Delta-8 with other isomers or synthetic reaction byproducts, again, for which we don't know the safety of. One of the things that's really frustrating for me is I hear people marketing this saying, well, it's a natural extract from the plant. This is not extracted from the plant. In theory, could you extract it from the plant? Yes. But if you did so, my estimate is that the wholesale price for a kilo of Delta-8 would be approximately $500 million, because there's such a little amount in there.
Walk around change for me.
Must be nice. I think I'd like to follow on that, if I might.
Yeah.
It's more than just that too, because at this point we also know that it doesn't just come from hemp, because there are other pathways to create the same product synthetically, and people are doing that and still calling it Delta-8 and saying that it naturally came from the hemp plant, when in reality it didn't even start in a hemp plant, right? So there's a couple of questions that were asked about, so is it synthetic? The process to make this is synthetic. The literature says that this is synthetic. If you were able to create genetics in a genetically modified plant where you were focused on growing it so it would just be Delta-8, similar to how people have made like CBG plants out there, though they do exist, it might be the case. Those plants don't exist yet, right? You can make this product from CBD that's grown in a tobacco plant that didn't come from a hemp plant, right? So just want to make sure we got that captured.
Yeah. Hey, Greg, you are in Tennessee, which I don't even think, maybe they have a CBD, maybe they have some CBD laws on the books, but what are you seeing in Tennessee? And then is there any policy discussions at the state level?
Well, I have to clarify. I've been living in small town West Virginia. I'm in the very process of relocating right now. Some of my friends tuning in will be like, "What? He's in Tennessee?" And in Little Follinsby, West Virginia, our little corner store up on the hill has a sign right by the drive-in window that says Delta-8 now available. There's great margins on these things. That's what's driving so much of it. And I have friends involved in this industry. There's so many points that have just been raised to touch on. I mean, Tiffany mentioned regulating for the point of solvents being dangerous, then you can blow yourself up. You also could pour that crap down the drain or out the back, and people shouldn't be allowed to do that. I mean, if you believe in environmental responsibility at all, and I'm not saying that good producers do, but when there's no quality control audits, who's to say? Just like you don't know what's going in there. On the synthetic, I think we're at this, honestly, I'm not on a crusade against Delta-8, but I kind of think that we might be at this existential moment for the hemp cannabis industry on whether do single molecules and plant-derived or natural plant extracts have a difference. So I've seen some old school hempsters say, hey, don't hate on Delta-8, cannabis is cannabis. No, in my view, human social, cultural, religious evolution is a mutualistic story with the cultivated evolution of the cannabis plant. We're more than just familiar with it. There's a deep natural history, and we are now making synthetic molecules that are using hemp ingredients in, with strong acids in a fancy chemical crock pot. And it's not the same to me. I have been in conversations with chemists who are trying to develop simple synthetic reaction chains from starting with hemp-derived CBD isolate and creating HU210, an extremely potent synthetic spice compound, or the newly described phytocannabinoid THCP. This was discovered by Italian researchers early last year. May or may not exist in trace levels in cannabis that's out there in commerce, but it hit the fan because it's supposedly 30 times more potent than THC. Whether those, depending on what is determined to be synthetic, these things could be just as much hemp. It could be a hemp spice market that is legally defined as hemp, according to the prevailing arguments favoring this push. And again, I would love to see a market for a more hemp-centric cottage industry on drug development of the kinds of ways that Tiffany very eloquently described. But there has to be accountability. It's like I told someone today on Facebook, any single batch error in a cardiac drug is a tragedy. That could be a life-saving drug. It shouldn't, doesn't mean you shouldn't make that drug. But if there's no accountability for the errors, then the industry has got problems.
Yeah, and this is also interesting, and we're about halfway through. I want to remind people we're actually going to open up for questions a little bit sooner than we normally do because of the interest in this topic. So just a reminder to our attendees, use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen if you can. If not, you can drop your questions in the chat feature. We will be monitoring them. Second, I just wanted to say on this discussion about synthetic versus non-synthetic, how interesting this is. And like we've mentioned a couple of times now, and for people who follow NCIA and whatnot, Mike and I are always coming at this from a policy position or looking at the policy implications of this. And, just hearing you guys talk about this and thinking about, I can certainly imagine a situation where Mike and I are going to get asked at some point from a congressional office, is Delta-8 synthetic? Is it natural? And I'm really glad we're having this conversation because it's not exactly as simple as a yes or a no, right? It's sort of like, for all intents and purposes, it's synthetic, right? It's sort of what I'm hearing, despite the fact that we know that it can naturally occur, but again, not in those quantities. And like Mike said, man, I really should have paid better attention in chemistry class a few years back. But just think that's really, really interesting. And Paloma, I want to turn to you next for a second too, because, you know, we're having this conversation today about Delta-8. But I think, again, it's important. I like to look at the big picture again and think broadly about what's going to be next. And you mentioned earlier Delta-10, right? And even beyond Delta-8, Delta-10, there are other intoxicating and psychoactive cannabinoids. You know, we're going to have to continue to have this discussion or get out in front of it. So Paloma, I want to hear from you. You know, do you see these concerns coming up again with other intoxicating cannabinoids like Delta-10? And, you know, again, getting back to what I was just saying there, how can we be proactive, again, thinking about the bigger picture and these different cannabinoids?
I think that's an amazing question. And I mean, we're gonna have a new cannabinoid on our plates every month now. I mean, 4 years ago, nobody even knew what CBD was. And I'm really glad that you differentiate intoxicating versus psychoactive. Even CBD is psychoactive. Even CBD comes with its own safety profile. It has drug-drug interactions, and that is a non-synthetic cannabinoid. So, you know, and as Mike said earlier on his Google search, I mean, human beings, we try to make sense of new things by comparing it to things we already know, right? So Tiffany and I, again, we're talking about it. We're calling Delta-8, you know, CBD on crack, which is so detrimental. We're calling Delta-8, you know, baby Delta-9, and it's none of the above. It's in its own category completely. I mean, we don't have the safety profile, the evidence-based medicine for Delta-9 again. So how can we expect to extrapolate that and put it into this completely unknown and synthetic, you know, isomer of Delta-9 that's taken out of the plant in a non-natural way? There's no possible way we can do that. And the fact that kids and geriatric patients can go, like everyone said, to 7-Eleven and get Delta-8. I mean, the backlash we can have from this, another epidemic like EU Valley last year, that's going to give everyone pause and then talk about it. So it's really important that we are ahead of this now. But again, safety profile, drug-drug interactions. A lot of people don't know that having these cannabinoids affect the level of different drugs that we have because it goes through our GI system. So the fact that it's sold over the counter like a gummy bear without any cannabinoid in it is incredibly dangerous and detrimental. So it's not when we're going to have, if we're going to have this crisis, it's really when it's going to happen.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I guarantee you, if I were to ask all the 535 members of Congress what Delta-8 was, probably less than 5 would even know what I was talking about. It probably would be that Chuck Norris movie. So one, I want to mention, I always mention this, NCIA, our policy shop, did a wonderful job in 2019. I've lost 2020, adapting a regulatory framework for the emerging cannabis industry. All this comes back to a lot of these whack-a-moles happen because we don't have regulations, because it's not legal, because we don't have rules, because we're not having an adult conversation about this. What is this? Is it safe? Let's study it because of its nature. It's something we're working on in Congress to, you know, eventually legalize this drug and have a discussion about that. But Michelle, if you got any good questions from the chat we want to throw out there?
Yeah. There actually is one, and Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot. I see you've been in the Q&A feature there answering some questions, and you answered one that came in from Barry, I think, and one from Barry and one from Dell that I want you to answer for everyone here, because I think there's something that people are curious to hear about. And then, of course, Tiffany, Greg, Paloma, if you guys have anything to add there, would love to hear from you guys. But the question that we got was, Chris, if you've tested thousands of products, what in general has been the amount of Delta-9 in the tested products? Barry was suspecting that it would be over the intended 0.3%, wondering how much that is. And then also, you know, what byproducts are you finding in those Delta-8 samples specifically? So Chris, talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in those test results.
So I actually just posted a link to some of the chromatography that is very typical of what we see in the chat room. What we see is what we would expect to see for a true Delta-8 product would be a very sharp chromatographic peak, indicating a very highly purified sample. Maybe some other minor cannabinoids would not be unexpected. But what we see is sometimes 20, 30, 35 peaks that we are starting to track down the identity of some of these. There's isomers like Delta-10, Delta-6A10A. And again, those have not been studied for toxicity, but we also see many other peaks that we cannot identify. When we do our analysis in our lab, we're using many different tools and factors to try and identify these compounds, and including UV absorbance and mass spec to look at fragmentation patterns. And so oftentimes these unknown peaks look very similar to THC from a fragmentation or a UV absorbance. So we know that they're related structures, but we don't know exactly what it is. And so that's part of the challenge. One of the problems I think that is part of this industry's current problem is that the laboratories are actually part of the problem. We were very early on, when we see these peaks that we don't understand, they go unreported. And so a producer that is making Delta-8 in their facility sends it out to a lab, and they get a lab result that says it's 92% Delta-8. They think they're good to go. My question is, what's the other 8%? And many labs are not reporting these. We always report on our certificates of analysis that there were other unidentified compounds for which we don't know their toxicity. And as such, these wouldn't be recommended for human consumption because we just don't know enough about it. And so it's not always the producers who are trying to do anything malicious by putting out Delta-8 products that are heavily contaminated. They just don't know because the labs are not reporting it. My advice is, if you have a Delta-8 test certificate, don't trust it. It's probably not right. I can almost guarantee you it's not right, that there's things there that were observed, but because they were not understood, they went unreported.
You know, Chris, lab shopping has always been an issue in the cannabis space, and I just think it's, for these reasons you've highlighted, much more profound in Delta-8. I have friends who are selling this and have told me they've taken their same product and gotten 0.3 Delta-9 and 8%, 8.0% Delta-9, which, to speak to Dr. Barry Gordon's question, like what range, how much contamination of Delta-9 THC, when you factor in what actually is Delta-9, do you see in these products?
Yeah, so we do see typically way over the 0.3%. And one of the challenges is that THC is a very complicated molecule. There is actually 4 different Delta-9s. And when you're creating this synthetically, you're creating a mixture of those. And because it's a mixture of those different Delta-9s, the peak looks slightly different than the purified one that most laboratories use from a certified reference standard, which is in sync with the cannabis plant's Delta-9. And so because it's shifted slightly, most labs will say, well, that it doesn't meet the retention time, and therefore we're going to call it not Delta-9. In fact, we're not even going to call it anything. But does that Delta-9 mixture, will that result in a drug test? Will it result in some level of psychoactivity in addition to that of Delta-8?
Will the National Drug Testing Lab that pulls the sample from your lab when they raid you decide that it was Delta-9? I think sometimes people, try to get behind these pieces of paper to defend themselves in these courts. And, when Chris makes these points, I think people who are trying to make this money, who are retailers, don't realize that that piece of paper, they don't care, right? You can tell them all day cocaine's not cocaine. They're going to tell you it's cocaine, right? I mean, the same thing happens here. And if the national drug testing labs are having the same issue, then it's just going to be synthetic, right? Here in Michigan, we had huge issues with that for years now, because they will come in and they will say, oh, this is synthetic THC, even if it's not, right, in our labs here, because they can't be certain that it came from a plant, right? And then guess what happens? Well, synthetic THC, maybe not allowed, and now you're in prison. So it's that where we want to be, because I've asked submitted questions and comments to the DEA and the FDA about this, and the FDA came back and said, cannabis derived products are not allowed to be used by consumers right now. It's not safe. They don't know that, they're not certain it's safe. And it makes me sad because I want to keep using them, right? And is it that simple, Tiffany? Because that was one of the questions I was going to ask next, is if someone asked what FDA, where they are in this. And I know that's something everyone's been beating their head about. So I don't know if you want to dive into that, but maybe it's just that simple. I mean, it is. The FDA made their stance very clear right after the Farm Bill. About 6 months later, they came out and they said, hey, these cannabis-derived products, they're not safe for human consumption. We are not saying that they are. They are not generally recognized as safe. You cannot put them into food or drug products and enter those products into interstate commerce. Full stop.
Well, on the
Right,
issue
which is part of the reason that the people are trying to find alternate places to move the CBD isolate that has been created by hundreds of companies all across the country. Right. I mean, if the FDA would have been more prepared, if we would have, as an industry, been more prepared to answer their questions, great, but we weren't. Right. And so now we're doing the same thing with Delta-8. Guess what, guys? It's still a cannabis-derived product that we don't have the necessary information to say that it's generally recognized as safe. Therefore, it should not be in foods. In case anybody was wondering, foods are things that you eat, okay? Or dietary supplements, which are also foods, but where you're, labeling them differently, right? We're just not allowed to do that. And if you wanted it to be a drug with medicinal benefits, well, then you got to file an IND, do the 10 years of research, get your NDA, like GW Pharma did for Epidiolex, which none of these companies we're talking about have done. So there is a regulatory framework. It exists. We are choosing not to use it. I'm not 100% sure why, right? Yeah. I'm doing all of this chemistry research, trying to get enough data to be able to present for an IND so that we can move forward. That's the way it should be done. It shouldn't be done on, gas station shelves. And
I have a follow-up, Tiffany, but Greg, I think you wanted to say something, so jump in.
Well, I was going to say on the issue of the FDA stance on Delta-8, there has been a position being worked out by the Association of Food and Drug Officials. AFDO is an organization that has existed since the 19th century to create model code for USDA and FDA. They've been working, and FDA is in communication with them about these problematic regulatory gaps that we've got. But I believe that the AFDO sort of committee on cannabinoids has communicated their position that Delta-8 is illegal, and this is therefore the banner that FDA is going to very clearly stand behind. I know that has been communicated in part through the website of Focus, the group Focus, Federation of Cannabis Unified Standards. So that's something people could look up. But maybe we give FDA a bit of a pass this last year for all they've had on their plate, but I find it hard to believe that there's any doubt that Delta-8 is considered illegal under the current status. If I can, since I'm speaking, if I can say one more thing, I don't know if you throw you off
say
on
whatever
following
you want.
up. But something that's came up, I think, is an astute point brought up to me is, hey, Dr. G, you're saying that if it comes from CBD isolate and turns into a different isomer, it's synthetic. What about the decarboxylation reaction? I mean, does cannabis create THC and CBD? No, it creates CBD acid. So is CBD actually synthetic? And I find that a compelling and interesting question. And to me, I fall on the side that you have to cook it in acid to get it to create something that doesn't happen in the plant. Delta-8 may occur in trace amounts in the plant, but CBD coming from CBD acid is not only occurs in the plant. I mean, if a plant goes to full harvest in a field, or if a tropical long day sativa is in hot weather, you're going to have plenty of decarbed Delta-9 THC naturally occurring in the plant. It not only occurs at significant levels, it is a thermodynamic inevitability that CBDA is going to become CBD. All it takes is a little heat and time. It takes no solvents, catalysts, or cooking. So I think if there's any legalistic determinations about what makes synthetic, putting it in a pot and cooking it in strong acid, synthetic. Letting it heat and dry, not synthetic.
Greg, I want to add something. I was speaking with one industry representative who was telling me, they were explaining that the conversion of CBD to Delta-8 was a passive experience, passive process. I said, well, it uses concentrated acid, so let's put a drop in your eye and tell me how passive it is.
I love it.
I think it's also worth noting that the regulators that regulate our food and to make these decisions already have categories to tell us whether things are natural or not, right? They have processes that they call natural.
Yeah.
This is not one of them. It's not on that list.
And American consumers have, many of them are certainly fine with consuming, foodstuffs that are not natural. And ultimately, I fall on a truth in advertising sort of thing. If there's a market stream for safe, regulated, non-natural cannabinoids, okay, I think I'll gravitate towards being a whole plant guy, but let's make sure that it's transparent and accurate and safe and isn't, scorching the environment behind your lab.
Yeah. Hey, Tiffany. So for the attendees, I've always wanted NCIA to be the thought leaders on everything cannabis related. We have wonderful committees doing a lot of work. We have a wonderful policy council producing policy papers. But Tiffany Paloma, aren't you on the science committee, I think? Are you on committees, and are you guys discussing this?
Yeah. We're actually in the process of writing a white paper that talks about this process. Last year, when the government came out with new guidance and Delta-8 was just starting to really be seen on commercial shelves across the country, we actually submitted comments over to the government saying, hey, this is happening. Because this is happening, we're going to need some better regulation, because right now there's nothing, right? And because there's nothing, there's going to be this gray zone and confusion, which is exactly where we are now. So we have a Mythbusters piece that we're working on to discuss potential harms, right? Because, people, whether or not D8 itself is harmful, there are the adulterants that are part of this process right now that have made people sick in the Midwest, mostly, that we're aware of at this point. Being able to, talk about what those harms look like, being able to talk about the other, the safe side of it with the manufacturing committee. So we're working with the manufacturing committee and the science committee together to do that. And I feel like both of those things are kind of better answer in the next, quarter. The questions that a lot of people are talking about in the chat about the different methods of synthesis. There's a new question in Q&A that actually, asked, hey, what if we could make this without using these solvents and these acids? I would love to see that. I am aware of 6 methods. All of them use solvents. If there is a solvent-free method, please, my email is part of this presentation somewhere, I'm sure. Share it with me. I would love to know more. I'd love to do the research. I'd love to talk to regulators about it from the science perspective.
Tiffany, this touches on CBN as well. I mean, there are labs making CBN with published synthetic that involve iodine that isn't always cleaned up. Now there are people, and I've been part of this process, trying to dial in procedures for just having a sort of a artificially, accelerated oxidation, right? Just maybe heat it under UV, higher oxygen environment, speed up the natural degradation of, well, THCs. So you're going to have the whole issue of work in progress with high THC content. But is there a way that I've heard people say we're making CBN in a way that is completely just an accelerated aging. Do you know if that's actually going on? Because people don't invite me into their labs. I got to tell you, they see me and they're like, yeah, maybe not. We've got too much IP.
So I made CBN once in the past, and it, is accelerated aging. Perhaps it was enhanced exposure to UV light under acidic conditions. Is that accelerating the natural progress, maybe thermodynamically? Does the plant usually live in an acidic condition? Probably not. Have I seen people be able to do it in small quantities with less purity just by using UV light? Yes.
I have seen that.
So we could do that. Do we know that if you just store your stuff poorly, also known as in sunlight where it's hot, that you're going to get a bunch of CBN and then you could extract that? Yes. Are the people who are making concentrated CBN doing it that way? Not that I'm aware of. So I think it comes back to the truth in labeling that you mentioned earlier, Greg. Somebody just asked, hey, is Delta-9 an adulterant? Yeah, if it's not on the label. If you tell somebody that it doesn't have Delta-9 in it and it has Delta-9 in it, that's mislabeling, misbranding, and adulteration. And consumers don't appreciate that, because then they get things they're not expecting. And regulators don't appreciate it when when consumers get unexpected things.
consumers don't appreciate unexpected things. And back to the story about what's in your D8. I mean, like I said, I'm just moving back to Nashville, but I've hit some vape shops around here and talked to retailers, cool guys, whatever, they're doing their thing. But they'll tell me, some of them, once they get to know who I am and what I'm talking about and they know my stuff, they're like, yeah, I actually can't stand the stuff. People come in here and we tell them that it's, THC light, and but then you end up with somebody in an all-night anxiety hole from trying to eat too many gummies because they didn't think you could overdo it. Was that, again, contaminating D9, some other D something something, or is 200 milligrams of D8 enough to send you into an absolute anxiety fit, even an established smoker? When that's a lawmaker's daughter on the ground, we're going to start hearing bigger blowback.
I think when people from the Department of Transportation start losing their licenses and their jobs, we don't know how this is going to be metabolized.
Yeah.
But we can think that since we know that it sort of binds in the same ways, that our body may metabolize it similarly, and they're not testing for Delta-9 when they test you for drugs. Okay. They test for the metabolites that are left in your body. Are those going to be present with this legal form?
These also all have Delta-9s in significant concentrations as well.
Yeah.
So, you need less than 9 nanograms to pop dirty on a piss test. Okay, guys? You're using this substance and you think it's not Delta-9 and you're safe and you're not going to lose your job. You should wake up.
We worked at Pop Dirty, and so thank you, Tiffany. I love it. Paloma, you're in the DC area. You're around policymakers. You're also a doctor. Love to just hear your thoughts as far as, someone came up to you and talked about the safety of this issue as a doctor, or a policy person came up to you and asked about, the thoughts on the policy, and would love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the DEA always goes back and vilifies THC, any THC derivative of a plant. This is going to be labeled as a Schedule 1, just like every other cannabis derivative. The issue with Delta-9 compared to Delta-8, I mean, we discovered Delta-9 in Israel in 1964, and we still don't have a safety profile on Delta-9. So how the heck are we going to have this, it's not, I don't like calling it a new cannabinoid, this hot topic cannabinoid right now out on the market? We don't have pharmacokinetic, pharmacogenomic studies on Delta-9, something that we study now for the past century. How are we going to have it on Delta-8? And, we're having all these great conversations in the comments, and I'm looking at them, talking about the difference between synthetic and non-synthetic. And, this is going to come up over and over again. Side effect profiles. Let's compare it to dronabinol, which is synthetic THC, which is a Schedule 3 right now. The side effect profile of dronabinol compared to Delta-9 THC, which is a Schedule 1, is vast in nature. So again, and I saw another comment saying the people that are going to buy Delta-8 are kids. They want to get high. They're seeing that they're able to get this high at the gas station, don't need their medical card, don't need to be 21 years old, hypothetically. So again, having this out there without having those safety profiles, BROS, is completely detrimental to the people that are using it again. And, again, it's not if, it's when this is going to really be an issue.
Let me insert something, and it's not contradicting what you said about kids seeking it, because kids are really finding this, but there are also folks who find themselves priced out of medical cannabis in restrictive markets, who are using Delta-8 products. And I had a correspondence with a perfectly grown-up gentleman today talking about how these Delta-8 products have been really beneficial for him dealing with his chronic pain. And again, and that's where I came up with the notion of, yeah, but you got to have safety. So it's true. By and large, people going in the vape shop and buying D8, it's kids. But there are medical uses, and I've got friends selling in hemp stores that are really pushing this, like, hey, we can't get into the medical cannabis space, but now we can use this medicinal, product derivative of hemp. They tend to be confused about how derived it is, and they think it's more of a natural extract. B, there's therapeutic uses, but again, people should have a natural right to cannabis and the incredible variety of formulations and genetic combinations that can come from different cannabis chemovars. It's the most natural thing in the world to seek therapeutic relief from herbal cannabis, and the fact that they get driven into this market because it's accessible, because it's got good affordability for them, is real unfortunate, because they don't know and I hate having to say, well, we don't know how unsafe it is, but it could be unsafe, and you could be damaging your liver in ways that we won't know about for a while, and that would, that's a damn shame. We don't want that to happen.
So one, if I were a teenager now, I would be all over this outside of the 7-Eleven. If I were in high school now, I'm old enough to remember, I'm older than everyone on here, that we were smoking cloves in 8th grade. And what were those doing? What were those doing? All the teachers, oh, you're going to bleed from your lungs.
I smoked a grapevine that I found out in the woods. I mean, these guys are going to be smoking D8 carts like they're going out of style. And
I would love, and I know if I ask open-ended questions, we'll each go for 10 minutes. So I'm going to put you on a timer. Love 60 seconds. I'll go Tiffany, then Chris, and Paloma, and Greg. 60 seconds. And one, as all of our attendees, I want you to know, we haven't formed an opinion on this. This is a discussion starter. I've never seen such a lively discussion as we've had on this. A lot of great topics going up. I could see us doing something, as Tiffany mentioned, through the committee, doing a policy paper, doing more around this issue. I would love everyone who's attending, who knows someone, please reach out to us, send comments. We'd love to learn more as we develop our position.
Keep an eye out for that email.
Yeah. So Tiffany, 60 seconds, give us a takeaway, something policymakers should know. We're in DC. What's the big takeaway?
Policymakers should know that this product, people are going to want to use it. The sooner that we get regulations in place, the sooner we can control the producers. The producers should be allowed to produce all of the things that we want to produce using the same rules that we use for all other foods and all other dietary supplements that are out there. And the fact that we're treating it in this gray zone is what's causing all these problems. The moment we stop doing that and we have specific concrete conversations about these products and start using our enforcement tools to stop bad actors, the safer our kids are going to be, right? And the safer all these projects are going to be, so that we can start enjoying them the way the world intends us to enjoy them.
Yeah, no, couldn't have said it better. Chris, your thoughts, 60 seconds.
The cannabis, our history with cannabis, the roots go back to the ability to use a natural product for its therapeutic or recreational purposes. And all of a sudden, the industry has taken this dramatic shift to this chemical, reagent, synthetic byproduct. For me, it's a huge liability. What happens when consumers realize that they've been duped and have been used as guinea pigs to consume all these products for which we don't have any knowledge? Like Tiffany said, the regulators have to step in and kind of put a stop to this or put some guidance to it. I'm not against Delta-8 at all. I think there's incredible potential for it. I just yet have not seen anybody doing it that I feel is appropriate.
Paloma, you're on the clock.
Yeah, just being a research physician and experiencing the pandemic and what it's done to people's mental health. 1 in 5 people have new onset mental health during this pandemic, and people are desperate for anything that'll really aid in their symptomatology, anxiety, depression, and they're tired of pharmaceuticals. They want to go to the first thing that they can, but unfortunately, we just don't know how this is going to affect people, especially people that are vulnerable with mental health issues. So it's of the utmost importance that we really, as researchers, as physicians, as policymakers, do our due diligence and really understand how this affects us and how it compares to this amazing plant that we've co-evolved with for thousands of years.
Amen. Greg.
Cannabis is safe medicine. By any measure that we determine safety in over-the-counter prescription medicines, it's a safe herbal medicine that we have an enormous natural history with. The tide has changed around public opinion towards cannabis. Everybody can see that. Regulators should find the courage to step up and regulate cannabis appropriately, e.g. the Schedule 1 status is completely ass backwards, it's never been based in science. And these amazing derivatives of the hemp plant, of the cannabis plant, can have big benefit to society in so many ways if there's a legal open market for drug development paths, for novel food ingredients coming from these natural plant sources. And so regulators need to see that it's a bold new world, step up and treat these things that are as intrinsically safe if they're done safely, including herbal cannabis, safe medicine.
Well, you guys, this has been wonderful. And you guys are getting, I don't know if you're watching the chat box, but all of the like virtual snaps and yeses in the world. And I just want to say from us to you guys, how informative and awesome this was. My mom actually texted me yesterday or 2 days ago and asked me what Delta-8 was. She had seen it somewhere, and I told her to hold off, that I was doing this webinar, that I was going to learn more, and I'd report back. And so I got to call my mom this afternoon, this evening, and tell her all the great stuff I learned here. But seriously, Tiffany, Paloma, Chris, Greg, all of you, thank you so much for joining us today. It was wonderful to have you with us. Appreciate your time. Mike, anything else you want to say?
No, as always, thank you, Michelle, for doing a wonderful job. Wonderful panel. And Brooke, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike and Michelle. And also, I want to sincerely thank all of our panelists for leading us through such an informative and engaging conversation surrounding such an emerging topic. And of course, thank you to all our audience members as well for tuning in, for all the great comments and questions throughout the session. It does sound like there's going to be some follow-up to this. Obviously, Mike suggested doing some white papers around this. Sounds like we're also going to put together a one-pager for elected officials, and maybe we'll have a part 2 session about this as well and see where things are in a few months. Please note the contact information listed on this slide, and feel free to reach out to any of the panelists here today to continue the conversation. And with that, thank you all so much for participating in yet another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. Please complete the attendee survey after leaving the meeting room to gain immediate access to our presentation. And do note that all NCIA members receive exclusive 30-day access to a formatted video recording of all of our Industry Essential webinars, first posted in our members-only community platform, NCIA Connect. We'll leave you with this end of event credit sequence highlighting the member businesses that participated in today's session. And if you don't see your company included, that means you need to head to thecannabisindustry.org/join to join the movement for a responsible and equitable cannabis industry. Enjoy, and hopefully we'll see you next week for the next NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. Take care.